Irene Callahan sat alone at her kitchen window, watching rain streams trace jagged paths down the glass, while her untouched coffee grew cold beside her. From the living room, she could hear her son Michael's animated voice as he discussed renovation, plans with his wife, Diane. The sound should have warmed her heart. Her only child, the boy she'd raised through poverty and hardship after becoming widowed at 35, now a successful man with his own family. Instead, each excited word felt like another brick being stacked between them, building a wall she wasn't sure she could break through. The home she had poured her heart into for 43 years was becoming unfamiliar territory, and she was increasingly feeling like an unwelcome guest in what had once been her sanctuary. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The wooden chair beneath her creaked as she shifted her weight, a sound as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. This farmhouse had been a wedding gift from her late husband's parents, a place where they had planned to raise a large family before cancer took James when Michael was only 7. The worn floors had supported her through grief. The walls had absorbed her tears, and the garden out back had fed them when teachers' wages weren't quite enough. Every corner held memories that Irene treasured. Michael's height marks on the doorframe of the pantry, the dent in the hallway wall from when he'd first learned to ride his bicycle indoors during a rainstorm, the small handprints he had pressed into the concrete when they repoured the back step. This house wasn't just a structure. It was the physical manifestation of her life's work and love. The conversation in the living room grew louder, and Irene caught fragments that made her stomach tighten. Mother-in-law suite? Convert the attic? She won't need that much space. Anyway, Diane's voice carried a certainty that sent a chill through Irene's bones. She had tried to like Diane, had genuinely made efforts since Michael had brought her home 3 years ago. But the young woman had always regarded Irene with a cool politeness that never thawed, no matter how many Sunday dinners Irene prepared, or how many of Michael's favorite childhood stories she shared. Diane seemed to view her not as family, but as competition for Michael's attention, a battle Irene had never intended to fight. Footsteps approached the kitchen, and Irene straightened her posture, plastering on the pleasant expression she had perfected over the past few years. Michael appeared in the doorway, his 6-foot frame filling the space. At 38, he looked more like his father every day, the same broad shoulders, the same cleft in his chin, the same way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. But there was something else there now, something calculating that made Irene's heart ache with longing for the sensitive boy he had once been. "Mom, can we talk?" Michael asked, pulling out the chair across from her. Diane followed, leaning against the doorframe rather than sitting, her arms crossed over her chest. She was beautiful in a severe way, sharp cheekbones, perfectly styled, blonde hair, not a wrinkle in her tailored blouse despite the humid day. At 33, she was a corporate lawyer with ambition that impressed and slightly intimidated Irene. "Of course, honey," Irene replied, pushing her cold coffee aside. "Is everything all right?" Her voice remained steady, though her heart had begun to race. There was something in Michael's expression, a mixture of determination and discomfort. That told her this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Michael cleared his throat, his fingers drumming on the worn wooden tabletop. "Mom, Diane and I have been talking about the future, about this house." He paused, glancing back at his wife, who gave him an encouraging nod. "We think it's time to make some changes." Irene's hands clutched her mug tighter. "What kind of changes?" Diane stepped forward now, her voice smooth and controlled. "Mrs. Callahan, we've noticed you've been having trouble maintaining the property. The gutters need cleaning, the back steps are starting to crumble, and the garden is becoming overgrown." Her tone was reasonable, but there was an undercurrent of criticism that made Irene's cheeks burn. Yes, at 67, some tasks had become more difficult, especially since her arthritis had worsened over the past winter. But she'd been planning to hire someone for the heavier work come spring. "We want to help," Michael continued, reaching across to pat her hand in a gesture that felt more patronizing than comforting. "Diane and I have discussed it thoroughly, and we have a proposition." Irene looked between them, a sinking feeling in her stomach. "What kind of proposition?" Michael leaned forward. "We'd like to move in here. The house is too big for just you, and with the baby coming, we need more space than our apartment offers." He smiled as though he'd just offered her a gift. Irene blinked, trying to process his words. "You want to move in with me?" The prospect of having her son close again momentarily brightened her spirits, despite her reservations about Diane. "Not exactly," Diane interjected, stepping closer. "We want to renovate, turn this place into our family home. We'd convert the attic into a suite for you. It would be private and you'd have everything you need." The momentary warmth in Irene's chest cooled rapidly. "The attic? But that's just storage space. There's no proper insulation, no bathroom." "We'd fix it up," Michael assured her quickly. "Put in proper walls, a small bathroom, even a kitchenette if you want. You'd be comfortable." Irene looked around her spacious kitchen with its morning light and view of the garden. The attic had 2 small windows and ceilings so low Michael couldn't stand upright in most of it. It was suffocatingly hot in summer and freezing in winter. "I don't think—" "Of course, if you don't like that idea," Diane cut in, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "there's another option." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we're prepared to buy the house from you. You could use the money to get a nice little apartment in town, something easier to manage." Irene felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. "You want me to sell you my home?" "It would be a fair price," Diane assured her. "We've already spoken to a real estate appraiser." The fact that they had gone that far without consulting her sent a wave of betrayal washing over Irene. "When did you decide all this?" Michael at least had the grace to look embarrassed. "We've been thinking about it for a while. With the baby coming in August, we need to get settled." "I see." Irene's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "And if I don't want to do either of those things? If I want to stay in my home as it is?" The silence that followed her question stretched uncomfortably. Michael and Diane exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "Mom," Michael finally said, his voice taking on an edge she rarely heard directed at her. "Be reasonable. You can't maintain this place by yourself anymore. It's not safe. And frankly, it's becoming an eyesore in the neighborhood." "What your son is trying to say," Diane added, her professional negotiation voice firmly in place, "is that this isn't really a request. The decision has been made. We're moving in by the end of next month. The only question is whether you'll be in the attic or somewhere else entirely." Irene felt her breath catch. "You're giving me an ultimatum in my own home?" "We're giving you options," Diane corrected. "Option 1, stay here, help us manage the house and help with the baby when it comes. We could use an extra set of hands, and it would give you purpose." The implication that Irene currently lacked purpose stung sharply. Option 2, take the money from the sale and start fresh somewhere else. Frankly, that might be better for everyone. "Better for everyone," Irene repeated slowly, the words tasting bitter. "You mean better for you?" Michael's expression hardened. "Mom, don't make this difficult. We've already started ordering materials for the renovation. The contractors start next week." "Without asking me?" Irene's voice rose slightly, something that rarely happened. "This is still my house, Michael. I paid off the mortgage 15 years ago." "Actually," Diane interjected, pulling a folder from her designer handbag and placing it on the table, "we've been looking into that. When Uncle Peter helped you refinance in 2015, the deed was modified. Michael is already co-owner of the property." Irene felt the blood drain from her face. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. It was true that her brother-in-law had helped with some financial restructuring when she'd needed to replace the roof, but she had never understood it to mean she was signing away partial ownership of her. "Oh, that can't be right." "It's all there in black and white," Diane said, tapping the folder with one perfectly manicured nail. "So legally, we don't actually need your permission, but we'd prefer to have your cooperation." "What Diane means," Michael added quickly, seeing the shock on his mother's face, "is that we want this to work for all of us, as a family." Family. The word echoed hollowly in Irene's mind. Was this how family treated each other? She looked at her son, searching for the boy who had once brought her wildflowers from the backyard, who had held her hand at his father's funeral and promised to always take care of her. Instead, she saw a stranger with familiar features, a man who had allowed ambition and his wife's influence to erode the values she thought she had instilled in him. "I need time to think," Irene finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Michael replied, standing up. "Take the weekend. But we'll need your decision by Monday. The contractors need to know if they're working around someone living in the house." Diane gathered her folder and gave Irene a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Think about it carefully, Mrs. Callahan. The attic suite would be quite nice with the proper renovations, and you'd get to see your grandchild grow up. That's worth something, isn't it?" The implied threat hung in the air between them. Accept their terms or never see your grandchild. It was manipulation of the cruelest kind. After they left, promising to call on Monday, Irene remained at the kitchen table. As the rain outside intensified, thunder rumbled in the distance, a fitting accompaniment to the storm raging inside her. This house had been her anchor through widowhood, through raising a child alone, through building a life she could be proud of. The thought of being relegated to the attic like some Victorian novel character, expected to serve her son and his wife while being grateful for the opportunity, made her stomach turn. But the alternative, leaving the only real home she had ever known, seemed equally impossible. As darkness fell, Irene finally rose from the table, her joints stiff from sitting too long. She moved through the house slowly, turning on lamps. Against the gloom, her fingers trailing along walls that had witnessed her entire adult life. In the living room, she paused at the built-in bookshelf where family photos were displayed. Her gaze fell on one of her favorites, Michael at his college graduation, his arm around her shoulders, both of them beaming with pride. What had happened to that relationship? When had respect turned to condescension? When had love become entitlement? Irene picked up a more recent photo, Michael and Diane at their wedding 2 years ago. She had worn blue, not wanting to compete with Diane's mother in her traditional cream outfit. She had helped plan the flowers, had offered to host the rehearsal dinner, had done everything possible to show support for the union, even as she noticed how Diane seemed to be pulling Michael away from her. In the photo, Diane stood between Michael and Irene, her smile triumphant. Maybe the signs had been there all along. Setting the photo down, Irene moved to the window overlooking the backyard. The rain had slowed to a gentle patter, and moonlight occasionally broke through the clouds, illuminating the garden she had tended for decades. The apple trees her husband had planted before his death now stood tall and strong, their spring blossoms just beginning to form. The thought of never seeing them bear fruit again made her heart clench. Suddenly, the walls of the house that had always offered comfort felt like they were closing in. Irene needed air, needed space to think clearly. Grabbing her raincoat from the hook by the door, she stepped out onto the porch, breathing deeply of the fresh, rain-washed air. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour, most windows dark except for the occasional blue flicker of a television screen. How many of her neighbors had faced similar crossroads? How many had chosen dignity over familiarity, courage over comfort? Irene had never considered herself a particularly brave woman. She had lived a conventional life, had followed the expected path of wife, mother, teacher, widow. But standing on her porch in the gentle rain, she felt something stir within her, a spark of defiance that had lain dormant for too long. Michael and Diane had presented her with two options, both designed to benefit them while diminishing her. But perhaps there was a third option they hadn't considered, one that would require more courage than Irene had needed in many years. As the realization formed in her mind, Irene felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration. Could she really consider such a drastic change at her age? Could she walk away from everything familiar to forge a new path? The thought made her dizzy with both fear and possibility. Back inside, water dripping from her coat onto the floor she had polished countless times over the years, Irene moved with new purpose toward the desk in the corner of the living room. Opening her laptop, she began to search, not entirely sure what she was looking for until the words formed beneath her fingers. Senior communities near me. The screen filled with options: retirement villages, assisted living facilities, independent living apartments. So many possibilities she had never considered before. Irene had always assumed she would age in place, would eventually need Michael's help as she grew older. It had never occurred to her that there might be another way, a way that preserved both her independence and her dignity. One listing in particular caught her eye: Silver Birch Estates, luxury senior living community. The photos showed a beautiful campus with walking trails, garden spaces, a pool, and sleek modern apartments. There were activity calendars filled with classes, trips, and social events. It looked nothing like the dreary nursing home she had visited her mother in during her final years. This was a place for vibrant people who happened to be in their senior years. People who were not done living, not ready to be tucked away in someone's attic. Irene's finger hovered over the request information button as doubt crept back in. Could she afford such a place? Would she fit in? Was she really considering abandoning the home that held all her memories? But then she remembered the folder Diane had so confidently placed on the table, the way they had planned her future without her input, the casual cruelty of their ultimatum. With sudden resolve, she clicked the button and filled out the form, requesting a tour the very next day. As she closed the laptop, Irene felt as though she had taken the first step on a journey whose destination she couldn't yet see. The house around her, the home she had loved for so long, suddenly felt like a beautiful cage, one she had been too comfortable in to notice the door slowly closing. But now she saw it clearly, and before that door could lock completely, she intended to fly. Irene barely slept that night. The rain continued its gentle rhythm against her bedroom window, a soundtrack to her racing thoughts. By 5 a.m, she had given up on rest entirely. She made her bed with hospital corners, a habit from childhood she'd never broken, and padded downstairs in the pre-dawn stillness. Moving through the quiet house, Irene felt a strange sense of detachment, as though she were already saying goodbye. She made a single cup of coffee and carried it to the sunroom at the back of the house. This small glass-enclosed space had been James's project the year before his diagnosis. "A place for you to watch the seasons change," he had told her. "Even when I'm working late, you can sit here and feel close to the world outside." Now, as the first hints of sunrise painted the eastern sky in watercolor washes of pink and gold, Irene wondered if James had somehow known she would need this sanctuary years later. The appointment at Silver Birch Estates wasn't until 11, leaving her with hours to fill. On impulse, Irene set her coffee aside and made her way to the attic stairs. If Michael and Diane were serious about converting that space into her suite, she should at least look at it with fresh eyes. The pull-cord light cast harsh shadows across the cluttered space. Plastic bins of holiday decorations, boxes of Michael's, childhood mementos, old furniture too good to discard but no longer needed downstairs. 4 decades of life, neatly labeled and stored away. The ceiling sloped sharply on both sides, leaving only a narrow strip in the center where even Irene, at 5'4", could stand upright. Two small dormer windows, cloudy with dust, offered meager light. The wooden floorboards creaked ominously under her slippers. "This is where they want me to live," she whispered to the silent room. The reality of it struck her like a physical blow. Not just a smaller bedroom, not even a converted garage apartment, but this. A space that had never been intended for human habitation. A sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob escaped her. What would her kitchenette look like? A mini fridge and microwave tucked between Christmas ornaments and high school yearbooks? Where would her bookshelves go? Her piano? The antique dresser that had belonged to her grandmother? As she turned to leave, Irene's foot caught on something, nearly sending her sprawling. She steadied herself against a stack of boxes and looked down to see what had tripped her. It was the handle of an old leather suitcase, poking out from beneath a dusty tarp. With some effort, she pulled it free, recognizing it immediately. This was James's old luggage, the set he'd used for business trips during their early marriage. Irene sank onto a nearby trunk, the suitcase across her knees. She hadn't seen this particular piece in years. The brass clasps were tarnished, but they opened readily enough. Inside, she expected to find more storage, perhaps old clothes or paperwork. Instead, she found herself staring at neatly organized travel brochures, maps, and handwritten notes in her husband's distinctive script. "Italy Summer Tour," read one folder. "Greek Islands Cruise," said another. "Grand Canyon Road Trip" was paper-clipped to a highlighted route map. Each packet was meticulously planned with notes about hotels, restaurants, and attractions. Some even had rough budgets sketched out. With trembling hands, Irene unfolded a letter written on James's company letterhead, dated just 2 months before his diagnosis. "Dear Mrs. Callahan, this letter confirms your reservation for the European Capitals package departing May 15, 1995. As requested, we've arranged the extended stay in Paris for your 20th wedding anniversary celebration. Your husband mentioned this was to be a surprise, so all further correspondence will be directed to his office address. Congratulations on your anniversary, and thank you for choosing Worldwide Travel Partners." Irene pressed a hand to her mouth, their 20th anniversary. James had been planning to surprise her with the European trip she had always dreamed about, but he never got the chance. By May of 1995, he had been gone for 3 months, and she had been too deep in grief and the challenges of single parenthood to remember their anniversary at all. As she carefully replaced the papers, something else caught her eye, a small velvet jewelry box tucked into a side pocket. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, the Eiffel Tower. A small card nestled beside it read simply, "For when we finally see it together." All my love, tears flowed freely now, dripping onto the aged leather. How much of life had she put on hold after James died? How many dreams had she deferred, saying someday, while focusing on Michael's needs, her job, the day-to-day duties that consumed her? 25 years had passed since finding that letter would have meant something different. Not a painful reminder of what could have been, but an exciting glimpse of adventures to come. Wiping her eyes, Irene carefully repacked the suitcase, but instead of returning it to its hiding place, she carried it downstairs with her. In the kitchen, she placed it on the table and stared at it, this tangible reminder of postponed dreams and the swift passage of time. Her phone chimed with a text message from the realtor at Silver Birch Estates confirming their appointment. Irene texted back her confirmation, then impulsively added, "Could you also provide information about financial options? I'll be selling my home and want to understand my choices fully." The response came quickly. "Absolutely, Mrs. Callahan. We have several financing packages and can put you in touch with our financial advisor. Looking forward to meeting you at 11 selling her home." The thought should have terrified her, but instead it felt strangely liberating, like setting down a heavy burden she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. This house had been her security, her constant through decades of change, but it had also become her limitation. How long had she been defining herself by these walls, this address, these possessions? Irene showered and dressed with unusual care, choosing a blue blouse that James had always said matched her eyes and a pair of slacks she rarely wore because they were too good for every day. As she applied a touch of lipstick, another item saved for special occasions, she studied her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked tired, yes, with silver hair and lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. But there was also a spark in her eyes that had been missing for too long. "You are more than this house," she told her reflection firmly. "You are more than Michael's mother, more than James's widow. You are Irene Callahan, and you still have life to live." Before leaving for her appointment, Irene did something she had contemplated many times but never found the courage to do. She opened the built-in desk in the living room and pulled out a leather-bound journal she had purchased years ago but left blank. On the first page, she began to write. "Today, my son and his wife told me I have two choices: be relegated to the attic of my own home and serve their needs, or leave forever. They didn't consider that I might have a third option. They didn't consider that I might choose myself." The words flowed more easily than she expected, years of unspoken thoughts finding their way onto the page. By the time she finished, the clock showed 10:15, time to leave for her appointment. She closed the journal with a sense of having crossed an invisible threshold. Silver Birch Estates was nothing like Irene had imagined. Located on the outskirts of town on what had once been a large farm property, the community consisted of a main building surrounded by clusters of modern single-story cottages. Gardens bloomed between pathways, and a small lake gleamed in the distance. The main entrance featured soaring ceilings, comfortable seating areas, and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. "Mrs. Callahan? I'm Patricia Winters, the community liaison you spoke with." A woman about Irene's age approached with an extended hand. Unlike the sterile corporate feel Irene had expected, Patricia wore a casual outfit with a colorful scarf, and seemed genuinely pleased to meet her. "Welcome to Silver Birch. Shall we start with some coffee in the cafe, or would you prefer to dive right into the tour?" "Coffee would be lovely," Irene replied, surprised by how nervous she felt. This was just a tour, she reminded herself. She wasn't committing to anything today. The cafe overlooked a courtyard garden where several residents were tending to spring plantings. Inside, small groups chatted at tables while others read quietly or worked on laptops. It reminded Irene more of a college student union than any senior facility she had visited. "Most people have the same reaction you're having," Patricia commented, noting Irene's expression as she took in the scene. "They come in expecting a nursing home and find something quite different. Silver Birch is an active living community. Most of our residents are in their 60s and 70s, fully independent, and looking for a simpler lifestyle with more social connections." Over coffee, Patricia explained the various housing options, from apartments in the main building to freestanding cottages with small private gardens. "We have different financial plans depending on your situation," she continued. "Some residents prefer to purchase their units outright, while others opt for a lease arrangement using the proceeds from their home sales as a down payment." "And what about care?" Irene asked hesitantly. "If someone eventually needs assistance?" Patricia nodded. "That's an important question. We have a separate assisted living wing for those who need daily help, and partnerships with excellent nursing facilities if more intensive care becomes necessary. But the goal here is to support independence for as long as possible. We have transportation services for those who no longer drive, an on-site health clinic, and staff available 24/7 for emergencies." As they walked through the community, Irene was struck by how active everyone seemed. In one room, a yoga class was in progress. In another, a group was discussing a book displayed on a large screen. Outside, she spotted people walking dogs, riding bicycles, and chatting in small groups. This wasn't what I expected, Irene admitted as they approached a model cottage near the lake. Patricia smiled. Let me guess, you were thinking hospital beds and bingo? Something like that, Irene laughed. This feels more like a resort than a retirement home. That's exactly the point. Retirement should be about living, not waiting. Patricia unlocked the door to the cottage. This is one of our lakeside units. It's actually available next month if you're interested. The cottage was smaller than Irene's. House, certainly, but thoughtfully designed with high ceilings, an open floor plan, and large windows that captured the view. The kitchen was modern and accessible, with a breakfast bar opening to a dining and living area. A primary bedroom included an ensuite bathroom with a walk-in shower, while a second, smaller bedroom could serve as an office or guest room. French doors led to a private patio overlooking a garden, and beyond it, the lake. Everything is designed for comfort and accessibility, Patricia explained, showing how the doorways were wider than standard, how the bathroom included subtle safety features, how the kitchen counters were at a height that wouldn't strain aging backs. But nothing looks institutional, because that's not how we view aging. For the first time since Michael and Diane's ultimatum, Irene felt a flutter of something like excitement. She could envision herself here, reading on the patio, walking by the lake, perhaps even making friends among people who wouldn't see her primarily as someone's mother or widow. What about visitors? She asked, thinking of Michael and the grandchild on the way. Despite everything, she couldn't imagine not being part of her grandchild's life. We encourage family visits, Patricia assured her. The second bedroom can accommodate overnight guests, and there's also a guest lodge near the main building for longer stays. Many grandparents find that quality time improves when they're not living under the same roof. The grandchildren see visiting as a special adventure rather than an obligation. By the end of the tour, Irene had seen the fitness center, the arts and crafts studio, the community gardens, and the dining options ranging from a formal restaurant to a casual bistro. She had met several residents, all of whom spoke enthusiastically about their decision to move to Silver Birch. Take some time to think about it, Patricia advised as they concluded in her office. This is a big decision. But if you're interested, I'd suggest getting on our waiting list. The lakeside cottages in particular tend to go quickly. What would that involve? Irene asked, surprised by her own interest. A refundable deposit to hold your place. If you decide to proceed, we'd work with you on the financial arrangements, including help with selling your current home if needed. Our goal is to make the transition as smooth as possible. Irene hesitated only briefly before reaching for her checkbook. I'd like to place a deposit on the lakeside cottage we saw, the one that's available next month. Patricia looked surprised. Are you sure? Most people take some time to consider. I've spent too many years postponing decisions, Irene interrupted with a certainty that surprised even herself. I'm 67 years old. It's time I started living for the present, not just maintaining the past. As she wrote the check, Irene felt a weight lifting. For 3 decades, she had defined herself by that farmhouse, by her role as Michael's mother, by the careful preservation of James's memory. But the woman who had dreamed of Paris with her, husband who had once had ambitions beyond raising a family, that woman was still inside her, waiting for permission to emerge. Driving home, Irene felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was grief, certainly, at the thought of leaving the only real home she had known as an adult. There was anger, too, at the circumstances that had forced this decision. But underneath it all was something unexpected. Anticipation. The cottage by the lake represented not just a new home, but a new chapter, one she would write for herself. Back at the house, Irene spent the afternoon in a whirlwind of activity. She called a realtor recommended by Patricia and scheduled an appointment for the following day. She contacted her bank to understand exactly what her financial situation would allow. She even called her old friend Eleanor, who had moved to Arizona 5 years ago, and spoke openly about Michael's ultimatum and her decision to move to Silver Birch. "Good for you," Eleanor said firmly. "I was worried when I sold my place, but it was the best decision I ever made. Less house means more life, Irene." By evening, Irene had compiled a folder of her own, one containing information about Silver Birch, notes about her finances, and the beginnings of a plan for her future. She also retrieved James's travel brochures from the attic suitcase and added them to her collection. Perhaps some of those delayed dreams could still become reality. When Michael called at precisely 7 o'clock, Irene was prepared. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Have you had time to think about what we discussed?" Irene took a deep breath. "Yes, Michael. I've made my decision, but I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you and Diane come over tomorrow evening? Say around 6? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Michael had clearly expected immediate capitulation, not a formal meeting. Sure. Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," Irene assured him, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I just want us to talk properly, as adults." After hanging up, Irene returned to the sunroom where she had started her day. The setting sun cast long shadows across the garden, and she could hear birdsong as the day's final chorus began. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, perhaps even heartbreak. But tonight, watching the sky fade from blue to indigo, Irene felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in years, she was making a choice based not on obligation or habit or fear, but on her own needs and desires. Whatever happened with Michael and Diane, whatever challenges lay ahead in starting over at 67, Irene knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never again allow herself to be made small in order to fit someone else's plans. Darkness fell. She switched on the small lamp beside her chair and opened James's suitcase once more. This time, she removed the silver bracelet with the Eiffel Tower charm and fastened it around her wrist. "Better late than never," she whispered. And in the quiet of the sunroom, she could almost hear James agree. The realtor, Marlene Jackson, arrived precisely at 10 the next morning. A brisk, efficient woman in her 50s, with a portfolio tucked under her arm and a keen eye that missed nothing as Irene led her through the house. "The property has excellent bones," Marlene commented, making notes on her tablet. "Period features that buyers love, plenty of character." "When was the last time the electrical was updated?" 5 years ago, Irene replied. "The plumbing, too. James was always insistent about maintenance, and I've kept up with it." Marlene nodded approvingly. "Smart. And 3 acres with mature landscaping. That's increasingly rare in this area. The E. Development pressures have most people subdividing." They ended the tour in the kitchen, where Marlene laid out comparable sales and market analyses. "Given the condition and location, I'd recommend listing at $485,000. We might see offers above that, especially if we create a bidding situation." Irene's breath caught. The figure was nearly double what she had expected. "That much?" "Property. Values have skyrocketed here since the tech corridor expanded. Your location is ideal for commuters who want some land but still need to reach the city." Marlene looked up from her papers. "Were you thinking of downsizing locally?" "No," Irene said, touching the silver bracelet at her wrist. "I've reserved a place at Silver Birch Estates." Marlene's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Excellent choice. My mother moved there last year. She's in one of the garden apartments. Best decision she ever made." She shuffled her papers, returning to business. "So, timing-wise, what works for you?" "Standard contracts usually allow 60-90 days for closing, but we can negotiate shorter or longer terms depending on your needs. My unit at Silver Birch becomes available next month. I'd like to coordinate the timing if possible. We should list immediately then," Marlene advised. "The spring market is heating up and your property will attract significant interest." She pulled out a listing agreement. "If you're certain, we can get started today." I have a photographer who can come tomorrow, and we could be live by the weekend." Irene hesitated only momentarily before signing. With each signature, each initial, in the margins of the contract, she felt more certain of her path. By noon, a "coming soon" rider had been added to a real estate sign in her front yard. As Marlene drove away, Irene noticed the neighbor across the street watching curiously. She waved, but didn't approach to explain. There would be time for goodbyes and explanations later. Right now, she needed to prepare for the evening's confrontation. The afternoon passed quickly as Irene gathered documents and organized her thoughts. She called her lawyer, a woman who had helped her with estate planning after James died, and scheduled an appointment for the following week. Then she contacted her bank again, confirming that the property deed did indeed list Michael as co-owner. AI, detail she had missed or forgotten when signing refinancing papers years ago. However, the bank manager added, he's listed as having right of survivorship, not as an equal owner. The property remains yours to sell during your lifetime. One small victory, Irene thought as she hung up. At 5:30, she showered and changed into a tailored navy dress she usually saved for special occasions. She applied makeup carefully, styled her silver bob, and fastened a pearl necklace James had given her for their 15th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized the confident woman staring back at her. "You can do this," she told her reflection, and for the first time in years, she believed it. Right at 6, the sound of car doors announced Michael and Diane's arrival. Irene met them in the entryway, ignoring Diane's raised eyebrow at her formal appearance. "Come in," she said pleasantly. "I've made coffee." In the dining room, Irene had set the table with her good china, placing a folder at each setting. Small touches of rebellion, she thought. Using the things she loved rather than keeping them for good. Michael looked wary as he took his seat. "You've been busy," he said, nodding toward the window where the real estate sign was visible from the dining room. "Yes," Irene agreed, pouring coffee into delicate cups. "I have." Diane reached for her folder, flipping it open to reveal printouts. About Silver Birch Estates, including the cottage floor plan and financial details. "What is this?" "My decision," Irene said, taking her seat at the head of the table. "You presented me with two options yesterday. Move into the attic and help raise your child, or sell you my home and disappear. I'm choosing neither." Michael frowned. "Mom, that's not fair. We never—" "Let me finish, please," Irene interrupted, with quiet authority. "I've placed a deposit on a cottage at Silver Birch Estates. I've listed the house with Marlene Jackson. She's the top realtor in the county. The proceeds will finance my new home and provide for my future needs." Diane's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Michael's face darkened. "You can't sell the house without my permission. I'm co-owner." "Actually, I can," Irene corrected gently. "I spoke with the bank today. You have right of survivorship, which means you would inherit the property when I die. It doesn't give you authority to prevent a sale during my lifetime." "This is ridiculous," Diane finally sputtered. "You're throwing away your home, our future home, to move into some old folks' warehouse?" Irene smiled. "Silver Birch is hardly a warehouse. It's a vibrant community where I'll have my own cottage, my own garden, and most importantly, my own life." "What about the baby?" Michael demanded. "Your grandchild will barely know you." The low blow stung, but Irene had anticipated it. "I'll be 15 minutes away, Michael. Silver Birch has guest accommodations, walking paths, a playground for when the baby is older. I can be as involved as you allow me to be." She paused, meeting his gaze steadily. "The question is, will you allow it? Or was access to my grandchild meant to be contingent on my complete surrender to your plans?" Michael had the grace to look ashamed, but Diane was undeterred. "This is a massive overreaction. We offered you a place to live, support in your old age. You offered me an attic, Irene corrected. You offered me a position as unpaid housekeeper and babysitter. That's not support, Diane. That's servitude. We'd have taken care of you, Michael protested. Taken care of me? By relegating me to the storage space? By making decisions about my home without consulting me? By presenting ultimatums instead of having a conversation? Irene's voice remained calm, but her words landed with precision. That's not care, Michael. That's control. Silence fell across the table. Outside, a cardinal sang his evening song, oblivious to the tension within the house. Irene sipped her coffee, allowing the moment to stretch. I raised you to be better than this, she finally said to Michael. I raised you to respect others, to consider their feelings, to approach problems with compassion. The way you handled this situation showed none of those values. Michael's face crumpled slightly. Mom, I'm not finished, Irene continued. I understand you're starting a family. I understand you need more space. If you had approached me honestly, if you had said, Mom, we're struggling with our housing situation, can we talk about options? We could have had a very different conversation. Instead, you tried to manipulate me, to back me into a corner where I had no real choice. She turned to Diane. And you're an intelligent, accomplished woman. You must understand that treating people this way, especially family, creates wounds that may never heal. Is that really how you want to begin your journey as parents? Diane stared at her coffee cup, her usual confidence noticeably absent. So here's what's going to happen, Irene said, her tone softening slightly. The house will be listed this weekend. Given the market, Marlene expects multiple offers quickly. I'll be moving to Silver Birch when my cottage is ready, approximately 4 weeks from now. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you'd cancel your contractors. And us? Michael asked quietly. What about our housing situation? Irene had considered this question carefully overnight. You're welcome to make an offer on this house like any other buyer, but you'll need to secure your own financing. I won't be providing special terms. She paused. However, if you're genuinely interested in the property and not just in controlling my life, I'm sure Marlene can help you put together a competitive bid. You'd make your own son compete for his childhood home? Diane asked incredulously. His childhood home that he was planning to renovate beyond recognition? Irene countered. Yes, I would. Because this isn't about sentiment for you, Diane. It's about property value and location. And if that's the case, you can participate in the market like everyone else. Michael pushed back from the table abruptly. I can't believe this. After everything, after all the times I helped around here, all the times I checked on you. You mean the obligatory Sunday visits? Irene asked softly. The 20-minute check-ins where you spend most of the time on your phone? The help. That consists of telling me what I'm doing wrong with the garden or the gutters? She shook her head. That's not the relationship I want with my son. And it's certainly not the relationship I want with my grandchild. Diane stood, gathering her purse. This conversation is pointless. You've clearly made up your mind to abandon your family when we need you most. I haven't abandoned anyone, Irene replied, rising as well. I've simply declined to be erased. There's a difference. Michael looked stunned, as though seeing his mother clearly for the first time in years. Mom, please, can we just slow down? Talk about this more? Maybe there's a compromise? I've spent my entire adult life compromising, Michael. Adjusting my dreams, my needs, my wants to accommodate others. It's time for me to live authentically, before it's too late. Irene fingered the bracelet at her wrist. Your father understood that life is short and precious. He would have wanted me to grab this second chance with both hands. At the mention of his father, something in Michael's expression shifted. He looked around the dining room, eyes lingering on the family photos, the worn furniture that told the story of their lives. You're really going to do this? Sell everything and start over at your age? Not everything, Irene said gently. I'm taking what matters, my memories, my passion for gardening, my hope for meaningful relationships, including with you and your child. The rest is just stuff. Diane made an impatient noise and headed for the door. Michael hesitated, torn, between following his wife and continuing the conversation with his mother. Go, Irene said softly. Think about what I've said. Think about the kind of relationship you want us to have moving forward. My door will always be open to you, Michael, whether it's this door or the one at Silver Birch. But you'll need to enter as my equal, not my keeper. After they left, Irene cleared the coffee cups with steady hands. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as she'd anticipated. Diane's hostility, Michael's guilt and confusion, both of their shock at her assertiveness, all expected. What she hadn't anticipated was her own strength, the calm certainty that had carried her through the difficult conversation. She moved to the sunroom for her evening ritual, watching as fireflies began to dance along the garden's edge. A text message chimed on her phone. From Michael. We need to talk more about this. Just us. Lunch tomorrow? Irene smiled slightly as she typed her response. I'd like that. The cafe at Harrison's, noon? His reply came quickly. I'll be there. A small step, perhaps, but in the right direction. Irene settled deeper into her chair, watching the night descend. For the first time in decades, the future seemed not a long, predictable road to be endured, but an adventure to be embraced. Later, preparing for bed, Irene paused at her dresser where a photo of James stood in a silver frame. I wish you could see me now, she whispered to his smiling image. I think you'd be proud. In the stillness of the room, she could almost hear his reply. I've always been proud of you, Irene. I'm just glad you're finally proud of yourself. Irene's lunch with Michael the next day was awkward at first. They sat across from each other at Harrison's Cafe, a neutral territory they had both enjoyed in happier times. Michael arrived first, securing their favorite corner table by the window. When Irene approached, he stood, a small courtesy he had neglected in recent years. I ordered your usual, he said, gesturing to the chamomile tea steeping beside a cranberry scone. Hope that's still your favorite. The small gesture touched her. It is. Thank you. For several minutes they engaged in careful small talk. The unusually warm spring, an upcoming local festival, a new bakery that had opened downtown. The conversational minefield of house sales and moving plans loomed untouched between them. Finally, Michael set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. I couldn't sleep last night. Kept thinking about what you said. Irene waited, giving him space to continue. The part about approaching you honestly hit home, he admitted. I've been treating you like, I don't know, like an obstacle or a problem. To solve, not like my mother. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of James that Irene's heart twisted. When did that happen, Mom? When did I stop seeing you as a person? The raw question deserved a thoughtful answer. Irene considered before responding. I think it happened gradually. After your father died, I poured everything into being both parents for you. My entire identity became Michael's mother. And somewhere along the way, I think we both forgot there was more to me than that. Diane said. Michael began, then stopped himself. No, that's not fair. I can't blame her. My choices are my responsibility. What did Diane say? Irene asked gently. Michael hesitated. She said you were manipulating me with guilt, that you'd try to sabotage our plans for the house because you couldn't accept change. Irene's eyebrows rose. Is that how you see me? As someone who can't accept change? I didn't used to, Michael admitted. You were always the one encouraging me to try new things, take risks. But these past few years... He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. These past few years I've been living on autopilot, Irene finished for him. Maintaining the house, following. Routines, existing rather than living. I can see how that might have given the impression I was stuck in the past. Their food arrived, providing a moment's reprieve from the difficult conversation. When the server departed, Michael leaned forward, his expression earnest. I need you to know I never meant to hurt you. The attic conversion, it seemed like a solution that would work for everyone. You'd have your own space, but be close to family. We'd have the house, but wouldn't need to worry about you being alone. Did you really think I'd be happy living in a converted storage space? Michael winced. When you put it like that, it sounds terrible. It was terrible, Michael. Irene kept her tone gentle but firm. The way you presented it, the way you'd already made decisions about my life without consulting me, it felt like I was being erased from my own story. He nodded slowly. I see that now. I'm sorry, Mom. Truly. The simple apology, offered without defensiveness, eased something tight in Irene's chest. Thank you. That means a lot. They ate in more comfortable silence for a few minutes before Michael spoke again. So, Silver Birch, it's really that nice? Irene smiled, her enthusiasm genuine. It's wonderful. Modern cottages, beautiful grounds. Activities, people my age with similar interests. I've already signed up for a painting class and a gardening club. And you're sure about the finances? It looks expensive. I've done the math, Irene assured him. With the proceeds from the house sale, I'll own my cottage outright and have enough invested to cover monthly maintenance fees and living expenses, plus a cushion for the future. I'll actually be more financially secure than I am now, with the constant expenses of maintaining this old house. Michael nodded, looking relieved. Good. That's good. He hesitated before adding, Diane and I had a big fight last night about all of this. Irene kept her expression neutral, though privately she wasn't surprised. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be, Michael said with unexpected firmness. It needed to happen. She's been controlling about so many things lately. The baby, the house, our finances. Everything has to be her way. He looked down at his plate. The way she talked about you, like you were just an inconvenience to be managed, it finally made me see how unreasonable she's been. Pregnancy can be stressful, Irene offered diplomatically. Hormones, anxiety about the future. It's not just the pregnancy, Michael interrupted. She's always been like this, but I've been making excuses. He met Irene's gaze directly. The same way I've been making excuses for how I've treated you. The honesty between them felt like a gift, a return to the close relationship they'd once shared. Irene reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We all make mistakes, Michael. What matters is recognizing them and trying to do better. I want to do better, he said firmly. I want my child to know their grandmother, the real. You, not some attic-dwelling babysitter. He took a deep breath. Which brings me to something important. Diane and I aren't going to make an offer on the house. Irene felt a flash of surprise. You're not? Michael shook his head. After seeing how much it meant to you, how you fought, for yourself, it made me realize we were approaching this all wrong. We don't need a farmhouse with 3 acres. What we need is a home that suits our family without trampling on someone else's dignity. What will you do instead? We've been looking at new construction in Riverside Village. It's closer to both our offices, has great schools, and the houses are designed for young families. He smiled ruefully. The truth is, I was pushing for your place partly out of nostalgia and partly because Diane thought it was a good investment. But it's not worth the cost to our relationship. The rest of lunch passed in easier conversation, with tentative plans made for Michael to visit Silver Birch once Irene was settled. When they parted outside the restaurant, their hug felt genuine for the first time in years. I'm proud of you. Mom, Michael whispered. Dad would be too. Driving home, Irene felt lighter than she had in months. The conversation hadn't magically fixed everything. There was still Diane to contend with, and rebuilding trust would take time. But it was a promising start. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. As Marlene had predicted, the house attracted multiple offers within days of listing. Irene accepted one significantly above asking price, with a flexible closing date that aligned perfectly with her move to Silver Birch. The practical tasks of downsizing consumed her. Days. Each object required a decision: keep, sell, donate, or gift to someone specific. She found the process unexpectedly liberating, as though each item she released lightened her spirit further. Some decisions were easy: kitchen duplicates, outdated electronics, clothing she hadn't worn in years. Others required more thought. Her grandmother's china would go to her niece, who had always admired it. The antique roll-top desk would be perfect in Michael's home office, if he wanted it. James's books would be donated to the library where he had volunteered after retirement. The most difficult items were those that held deep emotional significance, but would have no place in her new life. The cradle James had built for Michael. The oversized armchair where she had rocked him through countless fevers and nightmares. The height chart on the kitchen doorframe that documented his growth from toddler to teenager. For these irreplaceable mementos, Irene found creative solutions. She commissioned a local woodworker to transform the cradle into a small memory box. She took detailed photographs of the height chart and had them professionally framed. She kept swatches of fabric from the armchair to be incorporated into a quilt. Michael visited several times during this process, sometimes helping, sometimes just keeping her company. Diane remained conspicuously absent, though Irene noticed Michael frequently took photographs of items to show Diane later. A week before the move, Patricia from Silver Birch called with unexpected news. The current occupant of your cottage has moved out early for family reasons. If you'd like to start bringing some things over, the unit is ready. This accelerated timeline created a pleasantly hectic final week. Irene made multiple trips to Silver Birch, gradually transforming the empty cottage into a space that felt like hers. She planted herbs in containers on the patio, hung artwork that complemented the modern architecture, and arranged her carefully curated furniture to maximize the lake view. Each time she visited, she met more neighbors. Carol, a retired literature professor who had started the community book club. Hank and Jim, married for 40 years and enthusiastic gardeners. Marianne, a former nurse who organized weekly nature walks around the property. Unlike her old neighborhood, where younger families had gradually replaced her contemporaries, here she found instant connections with people who understood her life stage and experiences. The night before the final move, Irene invited Michael to dinner at the house, one last meal in the place where they had shared so many. She prepared his favorite pot roast, using her grandmother's recipe and the old Dutch oven that wouldn't be making the journey to Silver Birch. To new beginnings, she toasted, raising her wineglass across the dining room table. And cherished memories, Michael added, his eyes suspiciously bright. After dinner, he presented her with a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside was a framed photograph of Irene and James on their wedding day, restored and colorized by a digital artist. "For your new home," Michael said. "So Dad can be part of this chapter too." The thoughtful gift brought tears to Irene's eyes. "It's perfect. Thank you." As they stood on the porch saying goodnight, Michael hesitated, then said, "Diane has her 20-week ultrasound tomorrow. Would you like to come? Find out if you're having a grandson or granddaughter?" The invitation, the first real olive branch from Diane's side, meant more than Michael could know. "I'd be honored," Irene replied. Moving day dawned clear and mild. The moving company Irene had hired worked efficiently, loading her carefully labeled boxes and furniture into their truck. By noon, the house was empty except for the items designated for the new owners and a few personal treasures Irene would transport herself. She walked through each room one last time, saying silent goodbyes to the spaces that had witnessed so much of her life. In the kitchen, she ran her hand along the doorframe where Michael's height markers remained. The new owners, a young couple expecting their first child, had specifically asked that these stay. In the sunroom, she stood for a long moment, absorbing the view of the garden one final time. There was sadness, certainly, but it was tinged with excitement rather than regret. The house had served its purpose, sheltering her family through joy and sorrow. Now it would do the same for another family, while she embarked on an unexpected new chapter. Outside, Michael waited beside his car, ready to follow the moving truck to Silver Birch. "Ready?" he asked as she emerged from the house, for the final time. Irene took a deep breath, feeling the weight of James's watch on her wrist and the future stretching before her. "Yes," she said with quiet certainty. "I'm ready." As she locked the door and handed the keys to the realtor, Irene felt a profound sense of completion. The ultimatum that had initially felt like a betrayal had ultimately become a catalyst for liberation. By trying to diminish her, Michael and Diane had inadvertently propelled her toward a life more authentic and fulfilling than she had dared imagine. Driving away from the farmhouse for the last time, Irene didn't look back. Her gaze was fixed, firmly on the road ahead and all the possibilities it held. 6 months after moving to Silver Birch Estates, Irene stood on her patio watching the autumn leaves drift onto the surface of the lake. The water mirrored the fiery oranges and reds of the surrounding trees, creating a double spectacle of fall's glory. Her cottage had transformed from a pristine, impersonal space into a true home. Photographs adorned the walls, her treasured. Books filled custom shelves and potted herbs thrived on the kitchen windowsill. The second bedroom had gradually evolved into a combination office and craft room, with an easel positioned to capture the changing light throughout the day. Sipping her morning coffee, Irene reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that rainy evening when Michael and Diane had delivered their ultimatum. What had begun as a crisis had become an unexpected rebirth. At 67, she had discovered talents and passions long dormant, forged meaningful new friendships, and redefined her relationship with her son on healthier terms. The gentle chime of her phone interrupted her reverie. It was a text from Michael. "Heading your way, ETA 30 minutes, bringing someone special." Irene smiled. Today was a milestone day. Her first meeting with her granddaughter, Charlotte James Callahan, born 3 weeks earlier after a difficult delivery that had required an emergency C-section. Michael had visited several times with photographs, but concerns about newborn immunity had delayed Charlotte's first excursion beyond medical appointments. Suddenly nervous, Irene hurried inside to make final preparations. She had transformed the patio into a cozy outdoor sitting area with soft blankets and cushions where they could enjoy the autumn sunshine while keeping the newborn safely distanced, a precaution the pediatrician had recommended given cold and flu season. She arranged a basket of gifts beside her chair, a hand-knit blanket in butter yellow, a silver rattle, and a children's book she had loved reading to Michael. The knitting was a new skill, acquired through weekly classes at Silver Birch taught by Marianne, whose friendship had quickly become one of Irene's most treasured. The sound of a car pulling into the visitor parking area sent Irene's heart racing. Through the kitchen window, she watched Michael carefully remove the infant carrier from the back seat. To her surprise, Diane emerged from the passenger side, looking tired but composed in casual clothes. A marked departure from her usual corporate polish. Irene opened the door before they reached it. "Welcome," she said, her eyes immediately drawn to the tiny bundle in the carrier. "Oh, Michael." "Come meet your granddaughter," he said, his face glowing with the unmistakable mix of exhaustion and joy that defined new parenthood. "Charlotte's been looking forward to it." "She's been very insistent about it," Diane added with the ghost of a smile. "Especially at 3 a.m. The unexpected attempt at humor from Diane caught Irene off guard. Well, I'm certainly glad you're all here now. Please come through to the patio. I've set up a comfortable spot where we can visit. As they settled into the cushioned chairs, Michael carefully lifted Charlotte from her carrier. Would you like to hold her, Mom? Irene held out her arms, and the warm weight of her granddaughter settled against her chest. Charlotte blinked up at her with unfocused, dark blue eyes, her tiny fingers flexing against the receiving blanket. She's absolutely perfect, Irene whispered, taking in the delicate features and wisps of dark hair. She looks like you did, Michael. The same determined little chin. That's what the nurses said, too, Diane commented, arranging a muslin blanket over her shoulder in preparation for a feeding later. They pulled out that expression, spitting image, more than once. As Charlotte dozed in Irene's arms, the adults engaged in careful conversation. Michael updated Irene on the final details of their new house in Riverside Village, scheduled for completion in January. Diane, more subdued than Irene had ever seen her, occasionally contributed details but seemed content to let Michael lead the interaction. I have something for you, Irene said during a natural pause, nodding toward the gift basket. For Charlotte. Michael retrieved the basket, examining each item with appreciation. Mom, the blanket is beautiful. Did you make this? I did, Irene admitted with quiet pride. Marianne, my friend from the knitting circle, helped me with the pattern. I didn't know you could knit, Diane said, running her fingers over the intricate stitches. Neither did I until 3 months ago, Irene replied with a light laugh. Silver birch has been an education in many ways. As Michael continued exploring the gifts, Diane leaned slightly toward Irene. Your place is lovely, she said in a low voice. It suits you. The simple acknowledgement, delivered without condescension, felt like a significant olive branch. Thank you, Diane. I'm very happy here. I can see that. Diane hesitated, then added, It was never personal, you know. The house, the plans we made. I had this vision of what our family life should look like, and I didn't consider that your vision might be different. Before Irene could respond, Charlotte began to fuss, her tiny face scrunching in preparation for a cry. She's probably hungry, Diane said, reaching for her daughter. Do you mind if I feed her here? I'm still getting the hang of this whole nursing thing. Of course not, Irene assured her, carefully transferring the baby. The simple intimacy of the moment, Diane adjusting her shirt, Charlotte latching on with newborn determination, created a bridge between the women that formal conversation never could. While Diane fed the baby, Michael suggested a tour of the cottage. Irene led him through the compact but thoughtfully designed spaces, showing him the built-in storage solutions, the accessible bathroom features, the kitchen designed for ease of use. You've made it completely yours, Michael observed, pausing before a newly finished painting of the lake at sunrise, prominently displayed in the living room. Did you do this? My first completed canvas, Irene confirmed. I've joined a painting group that meets twice weekly. Turns out I have some small talent for landscapes. It's more than a small talent, Michael said, studying the work with genuine admiration. You've captured the light perfectly. As they returned to the patio, Diane was burping Charlotte against her shoulder. Your mom's an artist, Michael told her. You should see the painting in the living room. I wouldn't call myself an artist quite yet, Irene demurred. I'm still learning. That's something I'm trying to embrace too, Diane said unexpectedly. The learning curve. She adjusted Charlotte's position with an uncertainty that revealed her discomfort. Everyone talks about maternal instinct, but nobody mentioned how terrifying it is to be responsible for such a tiny person. The vulnerability in her admission created an opening Irene hadn't anticipated. It is terrifying, she agreed softly. I remember bringing Michael home and standing over his crib all night, just watching him breathe, convinced I would do everything wrong. Exactly. Diane's usual composure cracked further. The nurses made it all look so easy, and then suddenly, we're home alone with her, and nothing works the way it did in the hospital. The conversation shifted into unexpected territory as the two women exchanged perspectives on the challenges of new motherhood. Irene's memories still vivid despite the passage of time, Diane's experiences raw and immediate. Michael watched them with barely concealed amazement, witnessing a connection forming that he had likely thought impossible. When Charlotte began to fuss again despite having been fed and changed, Irene offered a suggestion. "May I try something? It used to work with Michael." Diane hesitated only briefly before handing over the increasingly unhappy infant. Irene cradled Charlotte against her shoulder, then began to sway gently while humming a half-forgotten lullaby. She paced the length of the patio in a specific rhythm. 3 steps, slight bounce, 3 more steps, another bounce. Within minutes, Charlotte's cries subsided into hiccuping breaths, then silence. "How did you do that?" Diane whispered, watching in disbelief as her daughter's eyes drifted closed. "The 3-step bounce," Irene explained softly. "I discovered it by accident with Michael. Something about the rhythm mimics the womb, I think. James used to tease that I looked like I was dancing with a very small partner." The mention of James created a brief, reflective silence. Then Michael spoke. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot since Charlotte was born, wishing he could have met her." "He would have adored her," Irene said with certainty, "and she would have had him wrapped around her finger within minutes. Like grandmother, like granddaughter," Michael said with a warm smile. The visit extended through lunch, which Irene had prepared in advance. A simple meal of homemade soup and fresh bread that could be eaten casually while tending to Charlotte's needs. As the afternoon progressed, the conversation flowed more naturally, with fewer careful pauses and tense moments. When it was time for them to leave, Diane surprised Irene with a request. "Would you consider visiting us next weekend? Maybe showing me that 3-step bounce again? We could have lunch at our place." The invitation, so unexpected after months of strained relations, momentarily left Irene speechless. "I'd love that," she finally managed. After they departed, Irene sat alone on her patio, processing the significant shift that had occurred. The granddaughter she had feared she might never know was now a real presence in her life. The daughter-in-law who had once treated her as an inconvenience had reached out with genuine vulnerability. And Michael, her beloved son who had temporarily lost his way, was finding his footing as a father while rebuilding his relationship with her. Silver Birch's dinner bell chimed in the distance, reminding Irene of the evening's community dinner. Unlike the solitary meals of her previous life, dining at Silver Birch meant joining friends at large round tables where conversation and laughter flowed freely. Tonight was Italian night, always popular with residents, and Irene had promised to save seats for Carol and her husband David, along with Marianne and her new gentleman friend Henry. As she freshened up before dinner, Irene caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her appeared somehow younger than she had 6 months ago, despite the same silver hair and laugh lines. The difference, she realized, was in her eyes, clear, bright, and forward-looking rather than clouded with resignation. The community dining room hummed with activity when Irene arrived. She spotted Carol waving from their usual table by the windows and made her way through the crowd, exchanging greetings with neighbors who had become friends. "There she is," Carol exclaimed as Irene took her seat. "How was the big meeting with baby Charlotte?" "Wonderful," Irene replied, unable to contain her smile. "Absolutely wonderful," as she recounted the visit to her friends, describing Charlotte's perfect features and the unexpected thawing from Diane. Irene felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Had she accepted the attic arrangement? Had she prioritized proximity to her grandchild over her own dignity and independence? She would have missed not only this vibrant new community, but also the chance to establish a healthier relationship with her son's family. "You know what impressed me most?" Marianne commented after Irene finished her story. Diane coming to you for advice. That's a significant change from the woman you described 6 months ago. Motherhood has a way of humbling even the most confident people, Carol observed, her eyes twinkling behind her glasses. Nothing like a screaming newborn to make you question your competence. It's more than that, I think, Irene said thoughtfully. When I stood up for myself, when I refused to be diminished, it changed how they both see me. Respect had to precede any real connection. A lesson for all of us, Henry commented, raising his glass. To Irene, who reminds us it's never too late to demand the respect we deserve. The conversation soon shifted to community matters, the upcoming fall festival, a proposed expansion of the garden plots, a new water aerobics class starting the following week. Irene participated enthusiastically, contributing ideas for the holiday decoration committee she had recently joined. Later that evening, as Irene prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a text message. It was from Diane, containing only a photo, of Charlotte sleeping peacefully in her crib, swaddled in the yellow blanket Irene had knitted, with a simple caption, "Your 3-step bounce worked all evening." Thank you. The simple acknowledgement brought tears to Irene's eyes. Not because it validated her knowledge or experience, but because it represented something far more valuable. The beginning of a genuine connection with the woman who would help shape her granddaughter's life. As autumn deepened into winter, Irene's relationship with Michael, Diane, and Charlotte continued to evolve in ways she could never have predicted. The weekly visits became a cherished routine, alternating between Silver Birch and their temporary apartment. Diane gradually revealed a softer side beneath her ambitious exterior, a woman struggling to balance her professional identity with new motherhood, afraid of losing herself in the process. In her vulnerability, Irene recognized echoes of her own journey decades earlier. How did you do it? Diane asked one afternoon as they sat in Irene's living room, Charlotte dozing between them on a playmat. Raise Michael alone, maintain a career, keep everything together after James died? One day at a time, Irene answered honestly. Some days better than others. There were moments I thought I couldn't possibly continue. Nights I cried after. Michael was asleep. Mornings I struggled to find the energy to face another day. But there were beautiful moments too. Unexpected joys that made the difficult times worthwhile. I didn't expect it to be this hard, Diane admitted, her usual confidence absent. Everyone talks about the miracle of motherhood, but nobody mentions the loss of self that comes with it. The loss is temporary, Irene assured her. You're not disappearing, Diane. You're expanding, adding a new facet to your identity, not replacing the existing ones. These conversations, impossible in their previous dynamic, gradually built a foundation of mutual understanding. Irene was careful never to offer unsolicited advice, waiting instead for Diane's questions. In turn, Diane began to value Irene's experience without feeling threatened by it. By Christmas, the transformation was remarkable. When Michael, Diane, and Charlotte arrived at Silver Birch for the holiday dinner, they brought with them a genuine warmth that had been absent from their earlier interactions. Charlotte, now 3 months old and more alert, became the center of attention among Irene's friends, passed carefully from one delighted honorary grandparent to another. Your family is lovely, Marianne commented as they watched Michael show Charlotte the twinkling lights on the community Christmas tree. You must be so proud. I am, Irene agreed. Of all of us, really. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined this. After dinner, as residents and guests gathered in the main lounge for carols and dessert, Michael pulled Irene aside. I have something for you, he said, presenting her with a small, elegantly wrapped package. An early Christmas gift. Inside the box was a travel wallet containing an airline confirmation. Paris! Irene gasped, reading the destination. Michael, what is this? Your dream trip, he said simply. I found Dad's old suitcase when we were helping you pack. Saw all the plans he had made. He squeezed her hand. It's time, Mom. Time for you to see the Eiffel Tower. Carol and Marianne have already agreed to join you. I arranged it with them last month. Irene's hand went to the silver bracelet with the Eiffel Tower charm that had rarely left her wrist since she discovered it. I don't know what to say. Say you'll go, Michael urged. Say you'll finally take this adventure Dad wanted for you. You've spent your whole life putting others first. Now it's your turn. Looking around the room at her new friends, her son, and his wife, her precious granddaughter Irene felt a sense of completion she had never expected to experience. The ultimatum that had once felt like the end of her world had instead been the beginning of something extraordinary. A life redesigned on her own terms, filled with creativity, friendship, and authentic relationships. I'll go, she agreed, her heart full. And I'll bring back stories to share with all of you. As the community choir began singing Silent Night, Irene looked out the large windows toward her cottage by the lake. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the landscape with gentle white flakes that caught the glow of pathway lights. 6 months ago, standing on her old farmhouse porch in the rain, she had taken the first step into an uncertain future, guided only by the courage to choose herself after a lifetime of choosing others. That single decision, that refusal to be diminished, had led her here, to this moment of perfect contentment surrounded by old loves and new beginnings. Her son had given her 2 impossible choices, never imagining she would create a third option that would transform all their lives. The path forward stretched before her, no longer shrouded in the fog of routine and obligation, but bright with possibility. Painting classes and travel adventures, quiet mornings by the lake and lively community dinners, precious hours with Charlotte watching her grow and solitary, moments of creativity and reflection. This, Irene realized as she rejoined her family and friends beside the Christmas tree, was what it meant to truly live rather than merely exist. This was the gift she had given herself when she had found the courage to say no to limitations and yes to possibility, and it had made all the difference. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.